What's up, City Group? My name's Kayla, and I am so excited that you are here today at City Group. It's a big deal that you showed up. I mean, you're closing out the semester, the school year. You could be doing a lot of things right now. You could be doing homework or sleeping or procrastinating on your homework by sleeping. But you showed up today, and that is a big deal. And I just wanted to welcome everyone who's here for the very first time, because that's also such a big deal. It can be a little bit scary walking into a new place for the first time, and I'm so glad that you made the decision to show up today. And over the next couple minutes, we're going to be talking about a question that one of you submitted. We're going to be diving into a topic and really discussing some answers for this question. And after that, we're going to break into small groups and talk about how we can apply this topic to our lives today. But before we get started, I want to know, because there are a ton of ways to stay connected today. I mean, it's 2022. Like, if you're not connected to the world, to your friends, like, come on, there's something wrong, right? So, how many of you, if you can only pick one, would want to stay connected through TikTok or through Instagram? I would pick TikTok because there's too much reading on Instagram. I need someone to say the words for me. I get a lot of my news from TikTok, which probably is like not good, but it's fine. I'm learning things on TikTok all the time. Okay, what about this one? If you had to pick one, would you pick FaceTiming someone or calling someone? Let me hear your answers. I pick FaceTime because I need to see the person. Otherwise, I'm not listening to you. If I'm not looking at you, I'm not listening to you. That's just the bottom line, okay? And we all have different ways, as we saw, of staying connected. I mean, it's easier now more than ever to stay connected to the people around us and the world around us. But I think that makes it even harder now to stay connected to God, because there's so many distractions, so many different things going on in our lives. And so that brings us to our question today. How do you stay connected to God even when it's hard? And honestly, this reminds me of something that Pastor Aaron spoke about a little bit ago in one of his messages. He talked about this idea. He made the comparison to eating, and if you know me, I love to eat, so it really just stuck with me. And he talked about this idea that every meal you have is essential, but it's not going to be memorable. And so if you asked me what I had for breakfast 2 days ago, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you. I probably can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I could tell you the last time I had some Chick-fil-A breakfast. It was about a week ago. My mom said, "Hey, I have some free chicken minis and the little coupon thing's about to expire. Do you want it?" And I said, absolutely yes. And so I rolled up to that Chick-fil-A drive-thru. I cashed in on some free chicken minis, and that meal, 11 out of 10, so good. I got myself a Dr. Pepper even though it's breakfast time. Don't judge me, okay? I'm working on that. But that meal was memorable, even though what I had for breakfast a couple days ago, 1,000% was not. And all that to say that when you're going through a hard time, don't quit on trying to connect with God. It might feel pointless. You might feel like there's no point in trying to connect with God. You might even feel like he's not listening to you. But every time you sit down and decide to have a moment with God, it is essential to your life as a Christian, as a human, when you're going through hard things, even though it might not be the most mind-blowing time of your life. And so now that we've decided we're not going to quit, how do we practically stay connected to God during this time? And when we're trying to learn something, I think we need to be looking at the life of Jesus. So we're going to dive into Mark 14, and this is where we find Jesus. He's about to go to the cross and die for our sins, even though he lived a perfect life. And if he had any reason to disconnect from God, I think that's a pretty good reason. I mean, if that was me, I'd be like, "Hey God, new phone, who this, block, report, done." But he actually made the decision to find time to connect with God. And so when we look at Mark chapter 14, verse 32, it says, "And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch.' And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, 'Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will.'" And so when we look at this passage, the very first thing that we see is that Jesus is finding a place to stay connected to God. He had to go somewhere and be intentional with his time with God. and by connecting with him through prayer. And sometimes it's really hard to not connect with God because we just don't have a habit. We're not preparing our minds to connect with God. And it reminds me of back in 2020 when everyone had to switch to school online. And it was really easy. At the time I was teaching, and it was really easy for me to like sit on the couch and say, yeah, like I'm going to do school eventually, but I just wasn't in the right place to do school. And so I had to find a spot in my apartment. I had to set up a table, and prepare a place that really put me in the mindset of doing my schoolwork. And the same thing goes with God. It's very easy for me in the morning to just like sit on the couch and scroll through my phone and say, yeah, I'm gonna connect with God eventually. But I've learned that's not really what works for me. And so I have a table set up in my house where I have a speaker right next to it so I can play worship music. I have pens set up so I can underline in my Bible and eventually journal and do all those things to connect with God. And when I find myself in that place, I know my mind automatically switches and says, okay, it's time to connect with God. And so I encourage you, if you're having a hard time connecting with God, maybe you just need to find the right environment, put yourself in the right place to connect with God. And the second thing we see Jesus doing is he brings people with him. He knows he's going through one of the toughest times in his life, and he makes the decision to connect with God, and he doesn't want to do it alone. He brings people with him. And a lot of times people tell the story from the perspective of the disciples because, spoiler alert, they fall asleep. And so if you're looking for some good friends, maybe find some that aren't going to fall asleep on you when you're going through a tough time. But I do think it's important to bring people alongside of you when you're going through a tough time connecting with God, because they can hold you accountable. I remember a couple years ago, I was going through a tough time just in my life, just going through not really a really hard, difficult season, but just like a meh season, Like it's not great, it's not bad, it's just meh. And I was finding a hard time finding motivation to connect with God. I was having a hard time hearing from God, and that kind of discouraged me a little bit as well. And so I remember I texted Pastor Sarah and I was like, hey, I am having a really hard time right now. I just can't seem to I'm in a funk, I can't seem to connect with God. And so not only did she take the time to sit there, talk me through some things, pray with me, but we started a Bible plan together, and she really held me accountable and was asking me questions like, what are you hearing from God in this season? And I think we all need someone to come alongside of us and really encourage us to lean in and connect with God. And so, you're in the perfect place to find people to do that for you. Your small group leader, that's what they're there for, to help you when it's hard to connect with God. They have some practical tools, and they have the accountability piece of just saying, hey, are you actually spending time connecting with God? When was the last time you actually prayed or opened your Bible and spent time with God? And that is what your small group leader is here for. So I encourage you to lean into that a little bit. And the last thing we see Jesus do is not only did he connect with his friends and be honest with them. He even opened up to his disciples and said hey, I am sorrowful even to death. And so not only was he honest with the disciples, but he was honest with God about what he was feeling. I think sometimes we disconnect with God because we maybe messed up, we made a mistake, and we're filled with shame. We think we did something that disqualifies us from even being able to connect with God. And that is so far from the truth. If you know the story of the prodigal son, God is waiting there for you, waiting for you to come back and connect with him. And so God is never disconnected from us. He's never hey, you actually messed up, so I'm just gonna block your number, never pick up when you call. That is the furthest thing from the truth. And so it's important to know that we can be honest with God. I think sometimes too, we have this idea that we have to come to God with this perfect life and say, hey God, I have it all together. But that's not true at all either. He says that we can cast our anxieties onto him. We can be honest with him. And we even see that with Jesus in this story. He's saying, hey, I really, really don't want to go to the cross right now. I really don't want this. So I know you can do anything. And so if it's in your will, maybe don't pick me. So we see Jesus in this moment, he says this important phrase that I think all of us should take into our time when we connect with God. He said, yet not what I will, but what you will. Not what I want, but what is good, what your will is for my life. And I think a lot of times too, when we're going through a hard time, we come to God with this long list of requests, and we forget that God has a plan for our own lives. And so if we just lean into our time with God with a little bit of a perspective switch and saying, I'm going to be obedient to what you are calling me to do. Even when it's hard, I'm gonna be obedient to what you're calling me to, even when I don't feel like it, even when it's not what I want, but it's what you want for my life. And so if we make that perspective switch, if we lean into God and just be honest with him in that time too, I think it can make all the difference in encouraging us to stay connected to God. And so we're gonna go into our small group time today. And I really encourage you, this can be a hard topic, especially in church. We feel like we have to pretend like we're always have it together, always connected to God. But I encourage you in the small group time to really show up, open up, be honest about where you're at in this season with connecting with God. And it could change your life forever. And so I encourage you, show up, open up, and it is going to be a great time in small group. See you later.